Hey Nishi, you ready?
Yeah, no, this structure deck's great. It even gave me my script for the video. What's up guys, Nishi from MST.TV here, and today we're going to be doing a discussion about Monarchs. So as I'm sure most of you guys that go to locals have seen, Monarchs, they're a very cheap deck to just pick up and play. You can really just buy 3 copies of the structure deck, add a couple of different other cards in, and boom, you're ready to go for locals. That being said, you guys really should be aware of all the different combos that the deck can do, and just in general how to play with the deck and how to play against the deck, so that when you guys are playing at locals, you guys have an idea of what you guys are up against. Don't worry, that introduction was just a joke. That's not the actual script for the video. Alright, so we're going to talk a little bit about the playstyle of the deck here. And obviously new Monarchs are very different from old Monarchs, right? The old Monarchs, we had different variations like Frog Monarchs. This new one, it's a really difficult deck to categorize under one playstyle. So on one hand, it can play a it can OTK out of nowhere, right? So we have cards like Ether, we have cards like Mega Thestalos, and then we have Kuraz that can deal a lot of damage to your opponent really quickly and try to kill them on the first turn. But at the same time, we play cards like Majesty's Fiend, Vanity's Fiend, and our field spell Domain of the True Monarchs that can really hard lock your opponent out and prevent them from playing the game at all. So Vanity's Fiend preventing your opponent from special summoning, Majesty's Fiend preventing them from using any effects, and Domain preventing them from using their extra deck. So it kind of depends on what your hand is, but you can either go for the OTK or you can try to set up a lock and prevent your opponent from playing at all. Alright, so now we're going to go into the core of the deck, and this really should be all of the cards that you should be seeing in every Monarch deck that you're going to be playing against. So first up we have Ether, the Heavenly Monarch. This is one of the new Mega Monarchs that we got from the structure deck. Level 8, 2800 attack points, 1000 defense points. It has 3 effects. The first one being the effect that all Mega Monarchs have, where you can tribute summon it by just tributing only one tribute summoned monster. Its second effect, when it is tribute summoned, you can dump 2 Monarch spell or trap cards from your deck to the graveyard in order to special summon a monster from your deck with 2400 or more attack points and 1000 defense points. And its third effect is during your opponent's main phase, you can banish 1 Monarch spell or trap card from your graveyard. After you do, you can tribute summon this card from your hand. So obviously this is a really good card. It's huge, it's 2800 attack points, and it's really one of the OTK enabling cards. Alright, so the other Mega Monarch that we got is Erebus, the Underworld Monarch. Same thing, a Mega Monarch, 2800 attack points, 1000 defense points, but it's a dark. First effect is going to be the same as all the other Mega Monarchs. Its second effect is same thing, you can dump 2 Monarch spell or trap cards from your deck to the graveyard, but instead of summoning something out of the deck, you can pick a card from your opponent's field, graveyard, or hand. If it's in your opponent's hand, the card is chosen randomly, and you can spin that card back into the deck. This effect is ridiculous. It doesn't target. It makes for really great turn 1 plays, setting your opponent's hand size down to 4, and lots of potential there. Its third effect is during either player's main phase. If this card is in your graveyard, you can pitch a Monarch spell or trap card from your hand to add it back from the graveyard. So this is another good card. If you don't have another big Monarch in your hand, it helps you to unbrick by getting rid of a spell or trap you don't need, say an extra copy of Stormforth, or it lets you pitch Prime Monarch and get it into the graveyard, and it lets you get this big card in your hand that you can immediately tribute summon afterwards. Alright, so next up for the Little Monarchs, we have what's probably my favorite card in the deck. We have Idea, the Heavenly Squire. This card is absolutely ridiculous. It's a level 1 monster that's a warrior type, so you can search for it with reinforcements of the army, and you can also special summon it off of the effect of 1-for-1. So it has 2 effects. The first is when it's normal summoned or special summoned. It's basically a tour guide, and it lets you bring out Eidos, which is the dark one that we're going to talk about after, out of your deck. And this effect triggers if it's normal or special summoned. So if you do use the effect, if you summon it off of 1-for-1 or the effect of Eidos, you do still get this effect. The other effect is even more ridiculous. When it's sent to the graveyard by any means, you can add one of your banished Monarch, spell, or trap cards back to your hand. And this is absolutely crazy because Pantheism is a card that will banish itself to get you a search and then can be added back with Idea. Or you can banish Monarch, spell, or trap cards off of the effect of the Prime Monarch, which we're going to talk about later. Alright, so next up we have Eidos, the Underworld Squire, and this is the Dark Mini Monarch. So same thing with Idea, it also has two effects. The first one, when it's normal or special summoned, you get an extra tribute summon during that turn. So this, even when it's summoned off the effect of Idea, you still get a tribute summon. So one of your main combos is going to be to summon Idea to special summon out Eidos, and then you get an extra tribute summon, and you can tribute both of the Monarchs to bring out one of your big Monarchs. The second effect of Eidos is that you can banish it from your graveyard to select one other monster with 800 attack points and 1000 defense points from your graveyard, probably going to be Idea, and special summon it out of the graveyard. Remember, Idea's effect is still going to activate, so you can still use its effect to bring out a second Eidos from your deck. So that's it for the lights and the darks. There are a couple of other Monarchs that you should be considering in your main deck. The first one being Mega Thestalos, the Fire Monarch. This is a really good card to have, especially in the main deck, because when you tribute summon it, you get to look at your opponent's hand, select a monster card from there, and that card goes to the graveyard, and you inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each level that the discarded monster has. It's a really scary card to play against because the Monarch player just gains so much knowledge about everything in your hand, what you can do, and they really don't have there's a lot less that they should be afraid of. They can pull problem cards out of your hand, and yeah, it's a good card. Alright, so the other Mega Monarch that we're going to talk about is Kayastha the Mega Monarch. This one's not quite as good as Mega Thestalos, but it is a very viable option in the side deck. So basically what it is, when it's tribute summoned, you can banish one card on the field, and if the card that you banish is a dark monster, you banish all copies of that card from your opponent's hand, the main deck, and the extra deck. So even if it's an extra deck monster, those copies are all going to get banished. And at the same time, if the monster that you tributed is a dark monster, then you get to banish 2 cards instead of 1, and the effect will still apply to both of those cards. Generally, this card's only seen in the side deck, because if you play it in the mirror match and you banish a copy of either Erebus or a copy of Eidos, you make it very difficult for them to play the game at all. And it's a guaranteed 1000 points of burn damage. Alright, so there's one other original Monarch that we're going to play, and that's going to be Kuraz the Light Monarch. Kuraz, some people are choosing only to play 1 copy, others are choosing to play 2, and when Super Quantums come out, there's a debate about you playing 3. Regardless, it's a 2400 attack point, 1000 defense point, level 6 Monarch, and its effect is actually kind of different from the other Monarchs in that it triggers when it's normal summoned or special summoned. When it is summoned, you get to pop up to 2 cards on the field, either your opponent's or yours, and then whichever player controls the card that was destroyed draws a card for each. So you can pop your own copies of the Prime Monarch or any spell or trap card that you set in your back row to draw your card and accelerate your deck. Or if your opponent has a problem card out on the board that you really want to get rid of, you can pop that, but you're letting them draw a card. This card's also, its effect will trigger when it's summoned off of the effect of Ether, so it's really versatile. Alright, so onto the Monarch spell and traps. We have probably the defining spell of the deck. We have Pantheism of the Monarchs. This card's nutty. It's basically a trade-in for Monarchs that lets you pitch any Monarch spell or trap card in order to draw 2 cards. Also, when it is in the graveyard, you can banish it, reveal 3 Monarch spell or traps from your deck. They can all be the same copy if you really want them to be, and your opponent picks one of them for you and you add it to your hand. The other 2 get shuffled into your deck. So basically it's a free +1 because you're going 2 for 2 by activating Pantheism and discarding a card and drawing 2 cards, and then you're going +1 by banishing it. Also remember the effect of Idea. will let you add the banished pantheism back into your hand. So just remember, the trade-in effect of pantheism of the Monarch is not once per turn. The effect to banish from the graveyard is, but you can trade in as many cards as you'd like. Next up, we have Tenacity of the Monarchs. This card is what adds the most consistency to the Monarch deck. All you do is you reveal one either Mega Monarch or regular Monarch from your hand. So either Ether, Erebus, Mega Thestalos, Mega kayastha, whatever, and you can search your deck for any Monarch spell or trap card and add it to your hand. Obviously really, really good. You can search for copies of Pantheism if your hand is bricked, or you can search for a copy of the Prime Monarch if you want to discard it off of Pantheism. A lot of really versatile plays there. Next up, we have 3 copies of the Monarch Storm. Monarch Storm, basically it's a quick play spell card that lets you tribute a monster on your opponent's side of the field in place of tributing one of your own monsters for a tribute summon. It's a really good card that lets you deal with any kind of problem monster, really. So Vanity's Fiends, Majesty's Fiends, if you're playing against Cosmo, it lets you tribute ships because it doesn't target. It's just a very good card in general that lets you get problem cards off your opponent's side of the field. Alright, next up, we have Domain of the True Monarchs. This is the field spell that kind of is broken against very, very certain decks, because while you have no cards in your extra deck and you control a tribute summon monster and your opponent doesn't control a tribute summon monster, your opponent is locked out of their extra deck. In a Yu-Gi-Oh world where a lot of people seem to be playing different pendulum types of decks, this card is really good because even if your opponent has flooded their extra deck with pendulum monsters, they can't be brought out. Also, if you control a bigger Monarch on board, it makes it very, very difficult for them to beat over it if they can't synchro or overlay. This card, it's debatable. Some people choose to play 2, some people choose to play 3. Personally, I play 3 because I want the extra discard fodder for Pantheism. It also has 2 other effects that not really very many people know about. So one of them, if a tribute summon monster you control battles with an opponent's monster, it gains 800 attack points and defense points. So just read your card, be careful. It plays a pretty big role in the mirror match as well, if you control it and your opponent doesn't. The final effect is that once per turn you can reveal a Monarch from your hand with 2800 attack points and 1000 defense points and lower its level by 2. So basically you can reduce the levels of Ether, Erebus, Mega Thestalos, or Mega kayastha, and you can tribute summon it by only tributing one monster. That card generally being the trap card, which we're going to talk about after. Next up, we have Return of the Monarchs. Here, people are generally only playing 1, maybe 2 copies. In the OCG, I think they're playing between 2 and 3. Basically, it's a black whirlwind for the deck. Whenever you tribute summon a monster, you can search for a monster from your deck with either 2400 attack and 1000 defense points or 2800 attack and 1000 defense points. Yeah, not much to say about this card. It adds a lot of consistency, lets you search for more copies of Monarchs from your deck. Also, just remember it has to have a different name from the monster that you summon. So if you summon Ether, you can't search for another copy of Ether. The last spell, March of the Monarchs. I think this card is actually really, really underrated. What it does is, it's a continuous spell. While you control it, your tribute summon monsters cannot be destroyed or targeted by card effects. So if you tribute summon an Ether or an Erebus, your opponent can't break through Skillet, they can't use Effect Veiler, and while you control them, or say you control a Majesty's Fiend or Vanity's Fiend, because those are also going to be tribute summoned, your opponent can't use Darkhold, they can't use Raigeki to get rid of them. So it's a really, really good card if you have monsters on board that you want to protect, but at the same time, arguably it's not really a combo piece. A lot of the time when I do play it and I draw it, I want to discard it with Pantheism, but if you do have a good setup in play, it can be a very, very difficult lock for your opponent to break. And onto the couple of trap cards that we have. So we're almost always going to be playing 3 copies of the Prime Monarch. So Prime Monarch has 2 effects. One, while it's a continuous trap card, once per turn during either player's turn, you can shuffle back 2 Monarch spell or trap cards from your graveyard back into your deck and then draw a card. This effect is good because it lets you shuffle back certain spells that you want in there. Maybe you're playing against Cosmo and you've used all your Stormforths and you really need one to get rid of a problem ship. So the option is there. A lot of the time you're going to be discarding it off of Pantheism or pitching it to the graveyard with the effects of either Ether or Erebus. Its second effect, when it's in your graveyard, you can banish another Monarch spell or trap card from your graveyard to special summon it in defense mode. It's not treated as a trap card, it's treated as a monster. 1000 attack points, 2400 defense points, and this effect can be used during either player's turn. So you can use it during your opponent's turn to block your opponent from attacking you directly. It just gives you another blocker. Or you can use it during their end phase, bring it out onto your side of the field so that during your turn you can tribute it off, summon a Monarch, and then you can bring it back again. So one quick ruling to note about the Prime Monarch, if your opponent activates Book of Moon or anything that would flip the Prime Monarch face down, it actually stays as a monster card and will be in face down defense mode. If you guys remember cards like Shaddoll Core or other trap monsters, those cards, they were treated as traps. So if you Book of Moon Shaddoll Core, it would go back to your back row. This one's a little bit different because it's going to stay in your monster card zone and you can still use it as tribute fodder. And the last card, this last card's kind of optional. Escalation of the Monarchs. It's a continuous trap card as well. You can activate the effect. Upon the resolution of the effect, you can tribute summon one monster. It's more of an optional card. I don't really like it, but it gives you the option of summoning something like Kuraz or Ether from your hand during your opponent's turn to disrupt their plays. Also, because the Monarch Stormforth is a quick play spell card, you can activate Escalation of the Monarchs, chain the Monarch Stormforth, then you can tribute your opponent's monster during their turn, and then get your own monster onto the field. Escalations combined with Stormforth is a really, really scary card to play against in the mirror match, or just to get rid of any combo pieces that you don't want your opponent to use. Alright, so the last card that kind of fits into the core of the deck here is Foolish Burial. It's not necessarily a mandatory card, but it is a card that interacts well with 3 different monsters in the deck. So the first one is Idea, because when Idea is sent to the graveyard, you can get any banished spell or Monarch spell or trap card and add it back to your hand. Eidos, because when Eidos is in your graveyard, you can banish it to special summon Idea from your graveyard. Or Erebus, because when Erebus is in your graveyard, you can pitch a Monarch spell or trap from your hand to add it back from the graveyard. So a lot of different possible interactions with Foolish Burial. Some players don't like it because they feel like it doesn't do enough, but it's definitely a good card to consider. Alright, so that's the core of the deck, but because I know that you guys are going to be seeing a lot of different Monarch decks at your locals or other big events that you guys are playing at, so there are a few different cards that you can play in your deck to kind of make your deck stand out a little bit or just make it seem a little bit more unique, okay? So the first card is Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. This is probably one of the strongest, like the strongest individual monster in the game. We all know what it is. You banish a Dark and Light from your graveyard, special summon it, and then it can either attack twice or banish a monster on the field. 3000 attack, 2500 defense, level 8. The thing about this card in Monarchs is if you look at the Monarch engine right now, we have 2 light monsters in Ether and Idea, and we have 2 darks in Erebus and Eidos. So that kind of opens up play for BLS because you can banish a Dark and Light and you can drop it, and it's big and it's scary and it'll probably win you a game or 2, and it'll make your opponent really salty. Next card, Dark Armed Dragon. So we have 5 dark monsters really in the deck because we have 3 Erebus and then we have the 2 Eidos, and the deck can control the graveyard relatively well because you can add back Erebus from the graveyard to your hand by pitching a spell card, or you can banish Eidos from your grave to summon Idea. So because of this ability to control the graveyard, Dark Armed Dragon is an option. At the same time, we also play Return of the Monarchs, and interestingly enough, Return of the Monarchs allows you to search for Dark Armed Dragon, so it's definitely an interesting card. There are times where it's difficult to fill your graveyard with enough dark monsters, but you know, it's something that you can search for, so it's not completely terrible. Next card that I have, Dark Simorgh. So funnily enough, Dark Simorgh is a card that you can summon off of Ether's effect. So when Ether's tribute summoned, you can dump the 2 Monarch spell or traps, and then you can special summon Dark Simorgh out of your deck. And this play is kind of funny because if you're tribute summoning Ether during your opponent's turn, you can summon the Dark Simorgh, and you're preventing your opponent from setting up their back row, preventing them from setting any trap cards at all. So they have to get rid of Dark Simorgh in order to play the cards, and if they can't, then you get to have your turn basically free of any back row because your opponent won't have had the opportunity to set traps. And then when Dark Simorgh comes back to your hand during the end phase, you have the opportunity to set traps if you play them. So it's an interesting card, kind of gimmicky, but it's something that you guys can look into. Another card is Light and Darkness Dragon. With all of this focus on tribute summoning, yeah, Light and Darkness Dragon, it's all play in Old Monarchs, so it has the potential to see play here. One thing, don't play it in the mirror match because it's absolutely terrible, because what's going to happen is you're going to go your opponent's going to go activate a card, they're going to negate it with Lad, and then they're going to chain Monarch Storm forth, and then they're going to tribute your Light and Darkness Dragon, and then you're going to cry because you put resources into putting the Light and Darkness Dragon on board. But in other matchups, so say against Pepe, just Cosmo, like any other deck other than Monarchs, it has the potential to be a blowout card just because of how big it is and the fact that it can basically negate everything. And then the last 2 cards, they're not really tech because they're more or less mandatory to the deck, but they're Vanity's Fiend and Majesty's Fiend. So I think that when most people think of these cards, they automatically associate them with Monarchs because they're also level 6 monsters with 2400 attack. They can't be special summoned, so you have to tribute them. A lot of players stand by the fact that you main them, and other players will say that you should be siding them. Ultimately, it's player preference. I prefer siding them. I don't really want to main them just because I'm not sure of which one I want to see in which matchup. Before the emergency ban list, I think people were going with Vanity's Fiend because Vanity's Fiend was better against Pepe, but with Pepe taking the very obvious hit, I think Majesty's Fiend is probably a better option to mainboard right now, just because it does it's a lot stronger against Cosmo. So yeah, Vanity's Fiend and Majesty's Fiend, you're gonna have to pick and make a decision for yourself, but they are definitely 2 cards that you should be playing in your Monarch decks. Alright, so now we're gonna kind of talk about cards that people will play against your deck as a Monarch player, and the cards that you should be playing in order to counter their counterplay. So 2 really, really common cards that are sided against Monarchs are Fog King and Mask of Restrict. Both of these cards prevent your opponent from tribute summoning, but the difference is Fog King's a card that's played really often in the mirror match, whereas Mask of Restrict is a card that non-Monarch players are going to play, so Cosmo, Pepe, whatever. In both cases, these are really, really problematic because tribute summoning is the main mechanic that you depend upon, so if you can't tribute summon, you can't play the game at all. That being said, Fog King kind of requires that you actually play in the side deck some kind of out to it. So we have different options. We have Raigeki and we have Double Dark Hole. Another option that I've seen is Swords of Concealing Light to force the Fog King face down. These are all ways that you can get rid of Fog King and just allow yourself to play the game again. Mask of Restrict is just another floodgate back row. Because of it, Twin Twister is actually a very, very viable card to side in the mirror match because you can blow it away. You can also blow away the field spell if you need to. At the same time, there are other floodgates that other players will side against you. So we have Light Imprisoning Mirror. Light Imprisoning Mirror is a pretty big deal. It stops the effects of Ether, Kuraz, and Idea. And then we have Imperial Iron Wall. Imperial Iron Wall stopping you from banishing using the effects of Prime Monarch or Pantheism. So Twin Twister is actually a really, really good side deck card to blow these floodgates away and allow you to play the game again. At the same time, some players play Royal Decree because, again, Royal Decree can shut off all the back row. Another answer to these back row floodgate cards is a card called Trap Eater. So if you don't know what it is, it's a level 4 tuner monster, the tuner part not being relevant because we don't have an extra deck, but you can send one continuous trap card your opponent controls to the graveyard in order to special summon it from your hand. And this is really good because not only are you getting rid of that problematic floodgate, but you're also special summoning a monster on board, and that's basically free tribute fodder. Alright, so a lot of the cards may seem pretty self-explanatory, but there are actually a few different neat little combos that you can pull off with the deck. So really quickly, we're going to go into a couple of them now. So generally, this hand looks rather unplayable because we have entirely Monarch spell and trap cards in our hand, and the temptation may at first be to use Pantheism of the Monarchs and pitch the Prime Monarch and draw 2 cards. But that's actually quite a misplay because the cards that we draw off of Pantheism might just be 2 more spell or trap cards, and we could find ourselves bricking. So what we're going to do instead is we're actually going to use Foolish Burial, and we're going to activate it to dump our copy of Erebus into the graveyard. Now remember, Erebus has an effect where we can pitch a Monarch spell or trap card from our hand while it's in the graveyard to add Erebus back into the hand. Now also, be careful here because the temptation may be to use the Prime Monarch, but we're going to think long term here and remember that Pantheism actually has a graveyard effect. So we're going to pitch Pantheism, add back Erebus to the hand. Now that Pantheism's in the graveyard, we can banish it and reveal 3 Monarch spell or trap cards from our deck to the opponent. In this case, we're going to pick 3 copies of Tenacity. Your opponent has to pick one of them. They're going to give you a Tenacity to your hand, shuffle the other 2 into the deck. Now our copy of Tenacity is live, so we activate Tenacity. We can reveal the copy of Erebus that we added to our hand, and we can search for any other card in our deck, or any other Monarch spell or trap card from our deck, which is probably going to be Pantheism. Now that we have Pantheism in our hand, we can activate Pantheism and discard the Prime Monarch and draw 2 cards. Now what we've done here is we've unbricked our hand. We've drawn quite well, so we have Domain and Idea both in our hand. We have something that we can normal summon, get our engine going. We have a copy of the Prime Monarch in our graveyard, and we actually have Stormforth and March to deal with any situation that might be a bit more difficult. We have Stormforth to get rid of monsters and March to protect whatever Monarch it is that we tribute summon. Alright, so next up we're going to go over a very simple situation with your opening hands. So first thing to note, if we do have a copy of Return of the Monarchs or March of the Monarchs in our opening hand, we actually want to activate those first before we do any of our tribute summoning. Because with Return of the Monarchs, that'll let us search when we tribute summon, or March of the Monarch will prevent any of our monsters, except for Idea, from being effect veilered. So very, very important here. So what our turn is actually going to start with, if we have those on board, we're going to normal summon Idea, and then from the deck, we're going to special summon our copy of Eidos. So remember, with the effect of Eidos, that gives us an extra tribute summon during the turn. So when we have Erebus in hand, we can tribute those 2 cards to summon Erebus. Now, Erebus' effect lets us pitch 2 Monarch spell or trap cards from our deck to pluck a card from the opponent's hand. So in this case, we can send 1 copy of Pantheism and 1 copy of the Prime Monarch from our deck to the graveyard, and then we pluck a card from the opponent's hand. If we're going first, this is going to leave them with only 4 cards in their opening hand, plus their 1 draw. Now that we have those cards in the graveyard, we can banish our copy of Pantheism, and then we can search for whatever situation we need, or whatever situational card we need. So if we have another Monarch in our hand, we might search for a copy of Tenacity. If we if we know that we're playing against something like Cosmo, we may want a copy of the Monarch Stormforth just in case. Or if we're playing against Pepe or Magispectre or something else that's dependent on its extra deck, then we might search for a copy of Domain. Remember that we still have these cards, so if you did have Return of the Monarchs, you'd also have a Monarch in your hand, added to your hand as well. So we might search for a copy of Ether, because we'd be able to tribute summon Ether during our opponent's turn, maybe pop our back row to draw cards, or disrupt our opponent's plays with Kuraz. So our last little trick here that we're going to show you is mostly for the mirror match, and this is going to be when you have a tribute summon monster on board and you have a copy of Ether in your hand, and your opponent tries to activate the Monarch Stormforth. So the Monarch Stormforth, clearly a very disruptive card, and if it resolves, you're giving your opponent a lot of advantage. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and get around this. What we're going to do is we're going to activate the effect of Ether in hand, and we're going to banish a Monarch spell or trap card from our graveyard, and then we are immediately after going to tribute our copy of Erebus to summon Ether. Now we can use the effect of Ether, and we can dump 2 Monarch spell or trap cards from our deck into the graveyard, and what we're going to do with that is we're going to special summon Kuraz out of the deck. Now with the effect of Kuraz, remember Kuraz's effect also triggers when it's special summoned. So what we can do is we can pop Kuraz itself and Ether. Now with those 2 cards, they go to the graveyard and we draw 2 cards. But now what we've also done, while we've maintained our card number, we've also made the opponent's copy of the Monarch Stormforth useless because there is no monster to tribute. Alright, so now we're going to go into kind of looking at what a good hand will look like versus a bad hand. Monarchs being now a very combo-oriented deck, you need a very specific cards in order to play. And the Monarch deck, there are tons of like jokes and memes online about the deck and how prone it is to bricking because of the structure of it. So really bad hands generally, you're going to see either too many of the big Monarchs, so you might open with multiple copies of Ether or Erebus and no way to bring them out. Or you might open with too many spells, or the trap being Prime Monarch, without pantheism. So you don't have a discard outlet to draw and help you get the engine going. In both of these cases, this is just a problem, but it's inherent with the nature of the deck because of how combo oriented it is. However, good hands are going to allow you to get the combos going. So good hands, you want to get pantheism with another spell or trap in order to help you draw. Pantheism being in the grave is going to help you search for certain spell or traps, whichever one fits the situation. Prime Monarch you want in grave because you'll be able to special summon it out as tribute fodder. Also, ideally, you want Idea to be in your hand because you can normal summon it out to bring out Eidos and get that extra normal summon. At the same time, opening with Return of the Monarchs is really good because it allows you to plus so consistently. It's just like how Monarchs will love opening. It's just like how Black Wings will really like opening with Black Whirlwind. And then at the same time, you also want to have at least 1 copy of a big Monarch, so either Ether or Erebus, or even Kuraz, just because you do need a card to reveal for tenacity, tenacity being the card that lets you get anything from your deck, and you'd need that bigger monster to summon over with. Alright guys, so last few things here, there's a couple things that we want to clarify. So the first one, Monarch Stormforth is actually kind of a complicated card. It introduces a really strange element where you're tributing your opponent's monster for your own tribute summon, but we actually did a video in our rulebook segment a little while ago. The links to that video is actually going to be in the description below, so please go check it out if you guys need any sort of clarification. The other card that I want to talk about is Domain, the field spell, and this is something that a lot of players may not actually look at carefully and understand, but the effect of the field spell is kind of like Secret Village. So while you control a tribute summon monster, and your opponent controls no tribute summon monsters, then their extra deck is locked out. So what that means is that if you control a tribute, if the player playing Monarchs controls a tribute summon monster, but your opponent also controls a tribute summon monster, they have regained access into their extra deck. So if you're playing something like Cosmo, I know kind of a bad example because Cosmo doesn't use their extra deck, but if you really, really wanted to, and you were to tribute summon a Slip Rider, for example, that would reopen access to your extra deck. So it's just something...
Monkey board!
Or Monkey board in Pepe, okay, but it's at 1 now, so... maybe. But yeah, just something to keep in mind and think about if you guys are playing in the future. As far as the future of this deck goes, there aren't really any new Monarch cards on the way. At least none that have been announced at the time that we're making this video. But within at the end of the week, they're actually going to release a new set, Wing Raiders, and in that set, we're actually getting the Super Quantum archetype. And this archetype is actually really, really popular in the OCG, and it's what's allowing Monarch to compete with Pepe for the spot as top deck. It's a small engine. It involves playing 3 copies of Emergency Teleport, 1 of the blue Quantum, and 2 of the red ones. So basically all you do is you activate Emergency Teleport to bring out the blue. The blue lets you search for a red, and you can special summon the red like a Cyber Dragon. But what this engine does is it gives you, it gives you tribute fodder because it's a special summon, and at the same time, you can pop them with Kuraz to draw cards, and then the blue Super Quantum will actually shuffle itself back into the deck. So your Emergency Teleport is still live, and it will essentially always be live unless they somehow banish the blue Super Quantum, and it gives you continuous fodder for Kuraz to keep on drawing and accelerating through your deck. Alright, well, that's all for this video. I hope you guys learned something about Monarchs if you guys didn't know some things already. If you guys like this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more stuff from MST.TV, make sure you subscribe, and of course, let us know what you guys think about the Monarch deck in general. Are you guys sick of seeing it? Do you enjoy playing the deck? What do you hate about it? Leave a comment down below, and until next time, make sure you hold on to your MST.TV.